okay, so this is more of my thoughts and not a review of She-Hulk, this series. First and foremost, I did not read the original She-Hulk comics, and I haven't read any of the subsequent comics with her in it or on her own since then. Actually, I don't know if there were any on her own since then. But anyway, her comic started in 1980, and rather than them doing it where they introduce her in another comic as kind of like, oh, is this, character going to sell or not? Like, popularity. They did it, straight out the gate, like she's on her own. I don't personally know why. I think there's, from me looking online, it looks like folks speculated that it could be for some sort of legal loophole thing because, again, 1980. So this is like was it 42? Like it's a while ago. Okay. It's a while ago. It's like 42 years ago. Um so I mean, like, different things were happening back then. So it just could have been one of those things. Um I don't know. Like, I haven't found much online, so I don't know. But either way, she started her own comic, and yeah, she did the fourth wall thing before Deadpool. So for all those little trolls out there like, oh, she's copying Deadpool. No, she came before Deadpool. But of course, some of those trolls are misogynistic a-holes and can't fathom that a woman would do something first. No, of course not. So anyway, because I've seen those comments, and they weren't just going off on She-Hulk. They used that as a reason to go off on women in general. So that's why I say they're misogynistic, is because it wasn't just the whole like trying to tear down She-Hulk. No, they're trying to tear down women in general, but they're using She-Hulk as the segue to try to get into their little soapbox. But anyway, so yeah, she did the fourth wall thing before Deadpool. Deadpool is still one of my favorite comic book characters. I mean, my dad would get the Spider-Man comics when I was a kid, and then of course my late uncle, he was the biggest fanboy of Captain America practically in existence. Like, he would put Agent Phil Coulson to shame. Like, he was the biggest comic nerd that I knew. Like, he could have his own like 3 or 4 comic shops with how many comics he had. Most of them signed. Like, he was big on that stuff, right? Anyway, so I mean, like, my introduction to comics started young, as well as books. And eventually, as I got older, when I was like 13, 14, I started getting into like comics and graphic novels in general. So afterwards, it was more of getting into like X-Men as well as Deadpool, eventually Avengers. And of course, because my uncle likes some Captain America, some Thor, like just, smatterings here or there. Um, so I'd gotten into that kind of stuff a little bit later when I was like an older kid or whatever. I never really read She-Hulk, but I like the concept of She-Hulk. Um, but one of the things that my uncle taught me from an early age, I'm pretty sure it was him, as well as I think my mom, because like when I was much younger and she wasn't as psycho. But uh, basically it was separating myself from expectations when it came to book versus movie, book versus TV show, comics versus movie. So I grew up having to separate my expectations, be like, okay, it's not going to be the same as the book or the comic. It's just not. You cannot have those expectations. The way they're going to portray something in media, completely different from what you want it to be. Okay. So you have to literally set that aside. If you can't, then maybe you shouldn't watch the movie or the TV show. Okay. You just shouldn't. So I've seen comments about people griping and groaning about the She-Hulk series not following the comic. And looking into it, it looks like she started on her own. She had like a good 2-year run, but then she was just kind of thrown into a lot of other comics. And apparently it was a decent run for her when it was just her based on the writing. Now, again, I'm not the expert. I haven't read it. So I'm going off of people's really in-depth analysis on the actual comics themselves and the character design and development. So that's not my exclusive observation. It's just, this is what people were talking about, that, the character development, the way that everything was written was different. And then she's thrown into other comics and became part of, I think it was like Fantastic Four and Secret Wars and a few other things. Like she done some crossovers and other things like that. Um, those are just the two that I remember reading about. So, um, anyway, so, and some of the writing on those comics in general were not good. So it's understandable that she'd be poorly written because the entire thing was poorly written. So, I mean, I didn't go into this series expecting it to be comic accurate or exact depictions of her comic self. Now, I do have Disney Plus, and my kids are both obsessed with Spider-Man. He's still their favorite. Now, Peter Parker Spider-Man is Connor's favorite. Miles Morales Spider-Man is Alan's favorite. Alan's my oldest. He's going to be 9 this year. Connor's going to be 5 next year. So they both love their own, like, versions of Spider-Man. They loved Into the Spider-Verse, okay? Like, they just absolutely love it. But anyway, so they watch anything they can get their hands on for Spider-Man, right? Well, age appropriate, because I haven't let them watch a lot of the MCU because they're still young. I fully intend to introduce them into that one day because I think they would really like it. But I'm just choosing to be like, let's wait a little bit until you're a little bit older before I really let you see a lot of these, because I have all the movies. And anyway, so they're watching some of the animated series of Spider-Man from the 90s. And in a few of those episodes, they have She-Hulk. And the way they portray her, made me think of, the way that they were doing this series, at least her persona, as She-Hulk. Now, they were introduced to She-Hulk through that medium. So she was, again, thrown into, something going on. Now, the animated series, from what I looked up on how she got her Hulk powers in the series, the animated series for Spider-Man, they did that pretty comic accurate, actually. That she was attacked or shot, or there was an accident, basically. I think in the original comic she was shot, she was targeted because she was trying to build a case against someone, like a gangster or whatever. And then Bruce did transfusion to help her with the help her live, but of course she got some of the radiation, all that kind of stuff, so she hulked out. In the series, I don't remember if it was like she was attacked or it was an accident, but either way, Bruce Banner was giving her blood in transfusion to help save her life. So that part was accurate for comic versus the animated series. So if you see animated series from the 90s, from like the 80s and 90s, they try to stay true to the comics. There's not a lot of like overarching, crazy, dramatic, whatever. They try to stay as as true to the source material. So I think those are, it's a good indication of how things have changed over time, right? The way that media portrays things. But either way, I went into this series not expecting anything from the comics. Okay. I knew it was going to be different. I wasn't going to, even if I hadn't read the comics, I knew it was not going to be the same. Right. So I think people need to suspend that sort of expectation and just look at it for its own merit. Now, here's the other side of it. I did not take it super seriously. And I think it's because I wasn't supposed to. I think it was written the way it was written on purpose. And I don't think people understand that. I think people were taking it way too seriously and thought, oh, this is a joke and you totally destroyed everything and like people are just whining about stuff. And I'm just like, I don't think it was meant to be super serious for the MCU. I think they presented it in the way that they wanted to present it for a reason. Now, I don't know how they're going to play the whole fourth wall thing in the MCU going forward for future projects with She-Hulk. But they could do it more subtly than they did in this series. Because this series, as soon as, she realized, oh, I broke the fourth wall, it was a little more prominent. But I just, seeing people react in the way that they have when they were acting like, like, oh, this is a joke and the writing's terrible. I'm like, pretty sure they did this on purpose. I mean, not everyone's going to agree with how they're handling the MCU. Not everyone's going to agree. Again, because people keep expecting them to be comic accurate or, graphic novel accurate or whatever. And you need to suspend that because it's not going. You need to suspend that expectation. You need to shelve it. You need to stop it because it's not going to be the exact same. I know that they're going to pay homage to it. They're going to kind of reach back and say, okay, we're in respect of or based on. That's the thing, is people don't understand when it says based on, it doesn't mean it's going to be exactly the same. Okay, so you need to stop that. You really do. It's not going to be the exact same. It's not. And it, like, my uncle understood that because, again, super fanboy of Captain America, super fanboy of Steve Rogers' Captain America. Like, he modeled himself after the character of Captain America, like as a person. Okay, so I mean, he did love Chris Evans as Steve Rogers in the MCU, and my uncle passed in 2016 from colon cancer. So actually the same that took out, Boseman. So, years later. So my uncle got to see Civil War, I think was the last one that he got to see before he passed. But he loved Chris Evans' take on Captain America, and he really enjoyed it. And he knew, though, that Chris Evans' take was not going to be exact per the comics. Okay, so it wasn't that, he, like, my uncle he looked at it and said, you know what, I know this isn't going to be the exact same. It's not going to be the same that I grew up with. Okay, like, he was born in the 50s. Like, it's not going to be the same for him. So he literally was like, I know it's not going to be, so I'm not going to go in there expecting it to be. I think people need to stop doing that when it comes to the MCU. They really do. It's based off of, okay, based off. I think there was a lot of things that they've tried to keep in there from the comics, but they're doing it in such a subtle nod that it's not like in your face the way the comics would be, because the comics would be like, here, all this, here you go. MCU is more like, here's a subtle nod, here's some Easter egg, here's how this ties in. They're not doing it in a very overt way, right? So there's that. But I really think that this series, like She-Hulk 2022, I think they did that on purpose, the way they wrote it, the way they did everything, and also the way they reacted to the trolls, because they knew they're going to be trolls. Like, even, like, because people were reacting to it within the first, episode, and people are acting like they did everything last minute. That's not how production works. Pretty sure they planned all of that out well in advance and wrote it that way well in advance, knowing they're going to be trolls, knowing they're going to be people who are going to be complaining up the wazoo about it. So, like, I'm pretty sure it's by design. So which I love. I really enjoy that. I really enjoyed their take on that. But those are my thoughts on that. And I really do think that they're going to have some of this play into, other areas, which actually feels like a nod to the comics itself, because she started on her own and then she was in a smattering of other things, right? They just kind of threw her into a bunch of stuff. So she's on her own for this one series, this one season, right? Actually, I don't know if they're doing another season, but either way, like, just this one take of her, right? And then they're throwing her into her future projects that are not her projects specifically, but she'll be a part of. So this is kind of her intro and a look at her character. Now, I agree that maybe it may not be as in-depth or as, like, as critical as the character development or how it was written for the original comics. I agree that, yeah, it could be completely different from that, again, because it's not going to be the same. But that could give potential for them developing her further in those future projects. So this is definitely the shoe-in of, hey, by the way, and we can go further with this later on, but this is just the intro. But that's my take on it. I think it was a great show. I enjoyed it a lot. I didn't think it was too campy. I mean, have you looked at some of the campiness of Marvel in general, of DC in general. Have you seen the campiness? Have you? Because I don't think you have. Um, like it, I don't think it was nearly as like if you look with fresh eyes from like 2022 to some of the comics from like the 40s, the 50s, the 60s and 70s. Yeah, the the way things are written, the overly dramatic, flair that they add or how they introduce characters, different storytelling techniques, okay? I really don't think She-Hulk was nearly as campy as some of the older comics for the guys. Not even any of the female characters, just the way that the guys did things. Over the top and overly dramatic and really just spazzy. Okay? Um She-Hulk was not nearly as bad. So, yeah. And the fourth wall thing, again, she did that before Deadpool. I really love Deadpool. He's still my favorite comic character. I absolutely love him. Maybe it's because he's also got that dark, sick, twisted kind of warped flair to him versus Jen Walters is definitely not nearly as psychotic as Deadpool. So there's my dark humor kind of side going out. But I still enjoy, Jen Walters She-Hulk. I still enjoyed what I saw. And I hope to see something similar. Though if it's other projects, I hope that if they are to weave in the fourth wall, they do it in such a way that it doesn't look like it's thrown in there. Like this, I think they did on purpose to make everything look thrown together. But I think that's more for comedic relief and for her character's intro and to not be taken too seriously. But in future projects, I really do think that they could weave it, a little bit more subtly. So either way, that's my take on it. If you are going to be nitpicky about it following the comics, not just the original comics from the 80s, but from like the 90s and 2000s when she was kind of thrown into other comic projects, if you're going to be nitpicky and you know that they're going to change it, then don't watch the show. Don't watch it. Don't be like, "Oh, this is a waste of time." Seriously? Just don't watch it. Just save us all of your angst, please. Like if I'm going to go and look at, that's the other thing too, is that I will look at some of the comic book or Screen Rant or, like I looked at some of those, posts because it's sometimes I find out things from them because I'm like, I really don't care about the whole spoiler thing because it's going to happen whether I want it to or not. But sometimes I'll go online and they'll be like, "Oh, they just announced this." I'm like, "Oh, okay, cool." But a lot of those posts now are just trying to destroy She-Hulk 2022. And they're just like trying to tear it down. And I'm like, okay, so you guys are, caving to the trolls then pretty much. You're going down to their level because they seem, it really feels like all the trolls that are against the series are really not a lot. I really think it's just, the smallest group is the loudest kind of thing. But it's also a lot of old, obnoxious white men. Like you see their profile pictures and they look old and obnoxious. And I don't know, that's just my take on it. But it seems to me that a lot of those recent articles are just catering to the trolls because they're like, "Oh, they seem the loudest." And again, suspend your expectations. It's not going to be the same as the comics. Now, I'm glad that they seem to retain some of her persona of like having conflict of how to balance, being a lawyer and a Hulk, and how Bruce Banner is like, "That's not how it's going to be." And she's like, that worked for you. That didn't work for me. That's not going to work for me. Like, I'm going to be different because I'm a different person. And I really, that actually speaks volumes to a lot of the generation where it's like, "Hey, you did it this way. Maybe it worked for you during that time. It's not going to work for me because I'm a complete individual." So there you go. There are a lot of things in there that I related to, probably because I'm a woman, but also just in general, having to deal with that kind of generational, that mentality of this is the only way to do things. And it's like, no, that's not the only way to do things. There are many different ways to do something, as evidenced by her saying, no, I'm going to go do this my way. There you go. But again, the series as a whole, please don't take seriously. I don't think it's meant to be taken too seriously. And I do find the brevity, the sort of like the short and sweet kind of, here you go, with a bit of, comedic effect. I find that refreshing because there are a lot of upcoming projects with the MCU that are going to be a bit heavier. Yeah. So so yeah, like, Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, that was pretty heavy. I mean, there are some people who are going to nitpick at it, but it's a lot heavier than this. I can guarantee you that. So I enjoyed that it was, a lot of brevity and a lot of levity. Anyway, that's just my take on it. Again, you don't have to watch it, especially if you're going to be nitpicky about it. But just if you want something fun and thrown together and just, out there, then watch it. It's not, I don't think it's meant to be taken seriously. I'm pretty sure they anticipate all the trolls and did everything on purpose with the way they wrote it, the way the story ended, all that. Okay. I'm pretty sure they planned this in advance. Have you seen the timeline for all their projects? This is years in the making. So I wonder about people who think that everything is slapdash at last minute, like absolute last minute. No, I'm pretty sure some of the stuff. Now, yes, they've had to make adjustments and editing along the way, but pretty sure this was planned well in advance so they can make room for other projects that I want to put more into. So I'm pretty sure they planned this, okay? just pretty sure. All right. I mean, have you looked at the MCU? Have you looked at their timeline? All the projects that they want to do. Yeah. This is probably, they probably decided all this stuff like forever ago and then just left it to be done while they worked on other projects. That seems very much like what they would do. So anyway, hope everyone's having a good day, and especially at the start of the week. Bye.